How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Ayin Zayin, Daf 77 of Masechta Gittin. Friends, what up? Okay. Today we are studying we're starting the 8th parak of Masechta Gittin. The 8th parak of Masechta Gittin is called Parak Hazorek, the one who throws. What do you think he's throwing? And to where do you think he's throwing it? Friends, we're going to bring up a shtickle memories from Masechta Shabbos, Masechta Eruvin, but it's not too difficult, I don't think. It's more of like a taste of these sugyas that we earned. We earned these sugyas of Otzah, the Dalad Rishuyis, and things like that. We earned these sugyas when we learned Masechta Shabbos, when we learned Masechta Eruvin. So these aren't, I don't think that they're very difficult sugyas. They're we just have to pull out our bekiyas of these halachis, and I think we should be fine. So, so we discuss these things a little bit, but it's really, I don't think it's too difficult. Alright, here we go. It's not such a long parak either. It's like 5 daf or something. So I think it's manageable. Okay, so we're going to start in Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph because yesterday was a bit of a longer daf. It was over 50 minutes as I had predicted. Today's slightly shorter because we already did half of Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph. So we're about 25% through the daf already. We haven't even started. Now, Hazorek Get Le'ishto. So a fellow throws a get to his wife. V'hi b'soch beisa, and she is in her house. Or b'soch hatzera, or she is in her courtyard. She is divorced. Zarko la bisoch beiso bisoch hatzero. But if he throws her the get, and she is in his house or in his courtyard, afilu hu Afilu he hu ima b'mito in megoreshes. But if they are in his house or his courtyard, even if they're together in the same bed, she is not divorced because it's not in her possession. But if he puts it into her lap or into her bag, so harezo migoreshes, then she is divorced. Okay, fine. How do we know that if he throws the get into her house or her courtyard, she is divorced? The Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, v'nosan biyado, that he puts the get in her hand. He puts the get in her hand. Ein li ela yoda. All I know is that she receives the get in her hand. Gaga, chatzer, v'karpefa. How do I know that even if he puts the get on her roof, in her chotzer, in her enclosure? Remember we learned about karpafs in Masechta Eruvin? I don't really remember the definition of a karpaf anymore, but it was some kind of enclosure, I guess. Minayin, how do I know that she's divorced in those cases as well? Tamlomer v'noson mikomakum. It says that he gives it. He gives it. Whether he puts it in her hand, whether he puts it in her chotzer, karpaf, gag, it doesn't make a difference. And we have the same halacha when it comes to a ganif, a thief. Yado. So if he, right, what does the pasuk say? If the lost object is in his hand, that's all I know. That's only if he gets caught red-handed. Gago chatzer v'karpefu minayin. How do I know if it's his roof, his chatzer, or his enclosure? Right, meaning so if Reuven's cow walks into Shimon's chatzer and Shimon closes the door of the chatzer, so how do I know that would also be considered theft? That however it will be found, it doesn't have to be in his hand, it can even be in his chotzer. So we see that both by a get, receiving a get, as well as by theft, it doesn't have to be specifically in their hand, it could also be in the gago, chatzero, karpefo. Fine. Vitzricha, and we had to mention that it is not limited to the hand both by get as well as by a ganif. Diash me'inon get, because if we would only say that a get is not limited to her receiving it in her hand, but also gago, chatzero, v'karpefo, mishum debal korcha migarsha. I'll say that it's not limited to her hand, but also, even if it just is thrown into her chotzer, she is divorced. That's because a woman can be divorced even against her will. And therefore, it's no surprise that he can even just throw it into her chotzer. She doesn't even have to receive it in her hand, and she's divorced. Aval ganif, there's no theft against his will, right? If Reuven goes to Shimon's chotzer and he puts his cow in Shimon's chotzer and closes the door, Shimon's not a ganif. So Eimalo. So I'll say that since there's no theft against a fellow's will, right? You can't, force Shimon to be a thief. So therefore, I might think that there's no theft in a courtyard either, right? That the laws of theft are less inclusive. Okay. So therefore, I needed to also, right, not just say by get, but oichet by a ganif. V'yashmin and ganif. And if we would only mention that by a ganif it's considered theft, not just in his hand, but also gago chatzer v'karpefo if he intends to steal. Mishum dekanse rachmona. I'll say that's because we fine him, right? Because a thief we want to fine. He's a troublemaker. So we say, what? It's not only theft if you steal with your hand, but even gago chatzer v'karpefo. Havel get emalo. But by a get, I'll say, no, she has to receive it, that's it. If you can't just throw it into her chotzer. Tzricha, therefore, we need to say, both by a get and by a ganif, that it's not right. It's not limited to their hand, but also gago chatzero v'karpefo oichet. Chatzero. So now, frekti Gemara. 1 second. The Gemara says, you know what the Gemara says? The Gemara says, hold your horses. That's what's going on. The Gemara says, hold your horses. I don't understand. The husband can just throw the get into her chotzer? But what about the halacha masha kansa isha kana baila? That what a wife acquires, the husband requires. So it just automatically, Babel sneeze. So therefore, if he throws it into her chotzer, when anything she acquires immediately goes to him. So he's essentially acquiring it, not her. Now this is talking about nichse melog, right? It's talking about that if she brought in this property, a house and a courtyard into the marriage, it belongs to her, but he gets access to any of the peiros. If there are fruit trees, he can access the fruits. And also in this case as well, if there's a get in there and she receives the get, well, he receives the get because he's zocha to anything in there, in the courtyard. So therefore, I don't understand how he could throw the get into her courtyard and then she's divorced. She's not acquiring it, he's acquiring it. Amar Balazar b'chosev la. So Balazar says, well, first, before throwing the get into the courtyard, he writes to her, Dinu dvarim einli b'nichsech, I have nothing to do with your nichsei melug, with your property. And then he throws the get into her chotzer, and he said he has nothing to do with it, so therefore she now owns it and she's divorced. But then the Gemara says, but that doesn't actually accomplish anything. That doesn't actually accomplish anything. V'atanya, we learn in a brayso, Omer lachaveru, that if Reuven and Shimon jointly own a field, and Reuven says to Shimon, Dinu dvarim einli al sadeh zo, I have nothing any longer to do with this field, ve'einli esek ba, I have no business with it, v'yadai misulekes emeno, my hands are separated from it, lo amar klum, he says nothing, because if Reuven wants to give away his part of the field to Shimon, he has to say to Shimon, I'm giving you my share of the field as a gift. But he can't just say it no longer belongs to me. Saying it no longer belongs to me accomplishes nothing. He has to give it as a gift. So here also, writing it in a document that he says, I don't have any rights to the peiros of your property anymore, means absolutely nothing. And therefore, when she picks it up, it still belongs to him. Right? Meaning when she acquires the get in her chatzar, it still belongs to him. So Amrei de Rabbiyanai, the say by the besmedrash of Rabbiyanai, b'chosev la ve'oda arusa. Oh, so he writes Dinu dvarim einli b'nichsech. He writes this to her when they are not yet married, when they're just engaged. So at that point, he does not yet have the rights to the fruits, to the nichsei melug, and at that point, he's able to write to her, I don't plan on accepting rights to the nichsei melug. And if he did that, well then, if they want to get divorced, he could throw the get into her chatzar and he won't have any access to her, only she will. It's like Rav Kahana says, that an inheritance that comes to, right, property that comes to a fellow from a different place, right? Meaning normally, right, I guess the standard sort of simplest way to acquire property is by inheriting it from a person's father. Right? Father passes away, he bequeaths property to a son, the son gets property that way. But here, he's getting married, and all of a sudden he's getting this property from some other place, through marriage. So Adamasna Aleh Shelo Yirashen, if he wants, he could say, look, I don't actually want it. Right? So therefore, and in that case, if he had said to her before they got married, look, I'm not interested in having any rights to your Nichsei Melug, well then, when they get divorced, he would be able to throw the get into the Chotzer, into her Chotzer, because he doesn't have any rights to it. Uchedirava, alternatively, you could say that the reason why he can give her the get in her Chotzer is like Rava. The Omer Rava says, Rava Omer, Ifshi b'takonos chachomim kigon zo, shomen lo. That if a fellow says, look, I'm not interested in the takonas chachomim, like this, we listen to him. What does it mean, like this? Ma'iki gonzo, what does it mean, like this? Kid Rav Huna Amarav. It's like Rav Huna Amarav that, of course, we saw in Masechet Ksubis. Dam Rav Huna Amarav, Yichol le'isha shetomar, a woman can say levilet to her husband, Eini nizonas ve'eni osa. I don't need your support, I don't need your food, and I also don't need to give you the stuff that I make. Right? Of course, we learned in Masechet Ksubis that there's a sort of an arrangement between a husband and a wife, that the husband supports her and pays for her food, but in turn, anything that she produces, any work that she does, he gets the payment, he gets the value of it. But, says Rav Huna in the name of Rav, that a woman can say, after the fact, right, even later on, she could say, you know what, forget about it. I'm making enough money on my own. I don't need your food. I'm not giving you my profits. So therefore, we could say the same thing over here. According to Rava, the husband would be able to say, I no longer want Paris, right? The Chachamim made this for my benefit, that I should be able to have access to the fruits of your Nichsei Melug. I don't want them anymore. I'm being moichel. I don't want them. And at that point, he could throw the get into her chotzer, and it'll belong to her, and she'll be divorced, because he said that, look, the Chacham said I have access to the fruits to my benefit. I don't want the benefit. So Rava says he can be moichel zan. Right? So again, right? So from the top of the Amud, that if a fellow says, look, I don't want the takonas chacham, the chacham made a takana to benefit me, I don't want the benefit, kigonzo, just like this, shomen lo. So we listen to the fellow, and he doesn't need to get the benefit. My kigonzo, what's kigonzo? What's like this? Like Rafuna Amarav, the Amar Rafuna Amarav, Yichol leisha shetom levailo, a woman can say to her husband, Eini nizonis ve'eni osa. Look, the rabbis were looking out for me when they said that I'm entitled to you paying for my food, but I don't want it, and I wanna, and in turn, what I have to do, my side of the deal, is I have to give you the profits of my work. I want to keep the profits of my work, and you don't need to feed me anymore. They did it for my benefit. I don't need that benefit. Okay, fine. So we said that. Okay, so we gave two reasons how he could throw the get into her chotzer and it works. One is that they made an arrangement before they got married that she would keep her own payers. The other one is to say, like Rava, that he could say, look, I'm not interested in getting the payers anymore. Fine. Now, both of those were based on the fact that he had said, I'm not interested in having access to the payers Nichsei Melug. Now we see that Rava himself says, that Rava himself, Otu Yoda Milo Kanyale Libal. So Rava has an interesting pshat. He says, well, one second. Even if the husband puts the get in the hand of his wife, he gives the get to his wife into her hand. But I don't understand. Doesn't he own her hand? The Gemara is going to say in a second, no, he doesn't. But doesn't he own her hand? Rather, when she receives the get, she also receives her hand. So, Hachanami here as well. That, yes, even if you say that he does have access to her Nichsei Melug, and he never relinquished it, and he does have access to the payers, and if he throws the get into her chotzer, yes, in theory, he would own the get. But the thing is, just like when he gives her the get, he owns her hand, but by receiving it, when she receives the get, she also receives her hand, and he no longer owns her hand. So here also, in general, anything in the chutzner belongs to him. He has access to the peiros. But when he gives her the get, so at that point, the get kicks in, and at that exact point, at that same time, he no longer has access to the fruits anymore, and she is kone the get, and he has no access to it, and they are divorced. Ravina asked Rav Ashi, Rava yad the isha kokashale? I don't understand. Rava was saying, well, how do you even explain when he gives the get to her in her hand? After all, he owns her hand, but okay, granted that he has access to the work of her hand, that because he gives her mizonis, so then he has access to the profits from the work that she does, but yoda gufa mikonile, he doesn't actually own her hand. Amalei Rava, so Ravashi answers Ravina, Rava yadho eved kokashale. No, he was actually asking about an eved. According to the Mandamar, who says that an eved himself could receive his shtar shichur, yad eved could kiad rabo damya. But I don't understand. How could you say that a fellow can give a get shichur to his eved, but doesn't he own his eved's hand? How can he give it to him? Anything that the eved gets belongs to the master, and therefore, how can he give him? He's not actually receiving the get shichur; it belongs to the master. So rather, we say that when the master gives the get shichur to the eved, together with his get shichur, he also acquires himself back. He acquires his hand back. Hachanami gita b'achzer kechad here as well. Even if you say that the husband does have access to the nichsei malug, but at the same time that he throws the get into the chotzer, she receives the get and also receives all rights to her nichsei malug, and he doesn't have any access to it, and she is divorced when the get is thrown into her chotzer. Hau shchiv mira dechosav lo gita lidvisu. So you have a fellow who unfortunately was on his deathbed, and it's mamish erev Shabbos, right before Shabbos, and he says, you know what, I'm nervous. I'm nervous that if I die, then my wife is going to have to do yibum with my brother. I want to avoid that headache. We all learn Masechta Yivamis, it's a headache. So he says, you know what, let me write a get for my wife, so that she'll be a divorcee and not a widow. So again, there was a Shchivmira who wrote a divorce document for his wife, on Erev Shabbos afternoon, on Friday afternoon. But he didn't have a chance to actually give it to her on Friday afternoon. It already became Shabbos, and then the get was muksa. And the next day on Shabbos, he was mamish feeling modno. Also, the Kamid Rava, so they came before Rava, Amarlu, and Rava advised, Zilu Amrule, say to the Shchivmira, Likani Niala, Lauduchto Diosa Begito. What he should do is he should be makne to his wife the area that the get is, right? So if the get is in a certain room, give ownership of that room to her. Sounds like, I guess that's acceptable on Shabbos. V'tezel I, and then she should go, v'tichud, and she should close the door, v'siftach, and open it back up, v'sachzik bey, and make a chazokeh on that real estate. Ditnan, because we learned in the Mishnah, no al godar paratz kolshu harezo chazoko. So when it comes to taking ownership of property, of land, so if you put a lock on the door, or you put a fence around it, or you make a breach in the fence, that shows that you really own the place, and at that point it's yours. And therefore the suggestion was, be maknet that place where the get is, and let her go in and close the door, and therefore she'll make a chazaka that she really owns this area. And then, do we say this over here? Rashi points out, right? Right, that when you purchase real estate, you also purchase any metaltalin that are on the real estate, and therefore when she takes ownership of this room, so then she's also taking ownership of the things in the room, including the get. Rav Elish says to Rav, but I don't understand, how does that work? Even if he's makne the room to her, and and now the room is hers, and now she therefore takes ownership of the get, but anything that she acquires, he acquires, so he's acquiring the get. So Ichsif, Rava was talking embarrassed. So Sofik Loy Milsa, Darus Avai, in the end it turned out that she actually wasn't married, she was just engaged. Rava, so Rava says, Imamu bin Nesua, Yom Barusa. So if we said that it belongs to him by a Nesua, that's not necessarily the case by an Arusa, and therefore that's why it's okay. But Hadar Amarava, then Rava said, wait a second. Loshna Arusa, Loshna Nesua. It doesn't matter if she's an Arusa or a Nesua. Gida v'chatzera ba'in ke'echad. The get and the chotzer, her access to the chotzer and him not being able to have access to it, come at the same time. When she receives the get, the husband no longer has access to that chotzer. And therefore she's divorced. So now so the Gemara says, one second. Why didn't Rava just say that initially, right? If we look at our Gemara, we first had the whole thing with Rava saying about how Gita v'chatzera ba'in ke'echad. And then we had this story about the Shriv Mira, and he said it's different because it's an Arusa. I don't understand. We had already explained that Rava's opinion was that Gita v'chatzera ba'in ke'echad. So ki Amar Rava ha'maisa Amar. So the Gemara says, no, actually, things are technically out of order. The truth is, he only learned, it was Davka from this Maise that he learned that Gita v'chatzera ba'in ke'echad, and therefore, when he suggested that it was only because she's an Arusa, he hadn't yet established that Gita v'chatzera ba'in ke'echad. V'hi b'soch beisa. So he said that if she is in her house, so then he throws the get into the house, so then she's divorced. Omar Ula, says Ula, v'hu she'omedes b'tzad beisa, that she has to be standing adjacent to her house, u'v'tzad chatzera, or adjacent to her chotzer. Rabbi Shai Amar afilu hi b'tveria v'chatzer b'tzipori. Rabbi Shai says, she doesn't have to be close by. Her chotzer can be in Tiveria. She can be in Tiveria. Her chotzer can be in Tzipori. He be Tzipori v'chatzer b'Tiveria or fakert. She's in Tzipori. Her chotzer is in Tiveria. Migorashes. She's divorced. It doesn't make a difference. Throw it into her chotzer. She's divorced. She doesn't have to be there. But it says in the Mishnah she's in her house or in her chotzer. This is what it means. V'hi kimi shebesoch beisa. V'hi kimi shebesoch chatzera. No, it's as though she's in her house or as though she's in her chotzer. The chevan, the chotzer mishtameres l'daita hi mizgareshes. L'daita hi mizgareshes. I think that's how to read it. That because she guards her chotzer, she puts a fence around it. She makes sure that it's enclosed. So, right, she's responsible for guarding it. So therefore, once the get is in her chotzer, she is divorced, even if she's in a different place, even if she's not there. Let's say that this is the machlokas between the opinion who says that she has to be nearby and the opinion who says she could be far away. That one opinion is that we learn out that she can be divorced if the get goes into her chotzer based on the fact that from her hand, right? We learn it out from her hand, right? It's not right that we compare the chotzer to her hand and we say that she's divorced, that her chotzer is like her hand and she's divorced, and therefore she has to be close by, just like her hand is close by. Whereas the other opinion is that no, the reason the chotzer works is it's like the messenger. The chotzer is like the messenger of the wife, and therefore she doesn't have to be close to the messenger. She can be far away. Lo, we say no. No, both opinions agree that the reason why a chotzer works is because we compare it to receiving it with her hand. It's just like she receives it in her hand, she receives it in her chotzer. Mar savar ki yada. So one compares it to her hand. Mayada b'smucha av chatzer b'smucha. So just like her hand is close by to her, so also she needs to be close by the chotzer. V'idach, and the other opinion is imayada b'dvuka av chatzer b'dvuka. So I don't understand. Your hand is connected to your body. What do we need your chotzer to be connected to her body? No, so elikiyada, what it means that we compare it to her hand. Mayada mishtameres ledaita av chatzer mishtameres ledaita. Just like her hand is guarded, right? She's in charge of guarding her hand. So also we need a courtyard that she is in charge of guarding, to the exclusion of a chatzar that is guarded without her da'as. And we explained that that's talking about her eved, if I understand correctly. That you can't give a get to her eved, because even though her eved is her property, but still, the eved has a mind of his own. And therefore, it's not mishtameres midaita, it's mishtameres midaito. He guards himself. And therefore, you can't give the get to her eved. But her chatzar, that she's in charge of guarding, and it's up to her to guard, so you can throw it into the chatzar, right? So just like her hand, she is in charge of guarding, so also her chatzar that she's in charge of guarding, you could throw it in there, and she's divorced. To the exclusion of her eved, you can't give a get to her eved, because the eved guards himself. How gavra dezorak la gita lidvisu. So you have a fellow who threw a get to his wife, have a kaima b'chatzar, and she was in a courtyard. Also gita nafel b'fisla, and then the get landed on a plank of wood. Rav Yosef, so if Yosef says chazina, we have to inspect. Yehavyo arba amis al arba amis. If that plank of wood is 4 amis by 4 amis, palag le rishusa lenavshe. Well, then it's its own area. It's not considered part of the chatzar, and she's not divorced. Ve'ilo, and if it's less than 4 amis by 4 amis, chad rishusahi. It's all one rishus. It's all one chatzar, and even if it lands on the plank, she would be divorced. B'mayaskin, what are we talking about? If we're talking about her chatzar, well then ki'ave dalet amis ma'ave. Who cares if it's 4 amis or not 4 amis? It's in her chatzar. She's divorced. And if you say that it's talking about his chatzar, kilo ave arba amis ma'ave. Even if it's less than 4 amis by 4 amis, still it's in his chatzar. It makes no difference, and she would not be divorced. So l'tzricha de oshla makom. It's talking about where it's his chatzar, but he lent her the area an area to receive her get. And if it falls on a plank, well then, right, if it's 4 amis, by 4 amis, it's considered its own place. And the chad makom moshle inshe, trei makomos lo moshle inshe. People only lend one area, not 2 areas. So if where it lands is on a plank that's less than 4 amis by 4 amis, so then it's considered just part of the chatzar, and he lent her, the chatzar to receive the get. So it's all part of the chatzar, and it's fine. But if it's 4 amis by 4 amis, then it's considered its own separate area, and he didn't lend her that area. Now this only works if it's less than 4 amis by 4 amis. We say it's okay and she's divorced. That's only if it is less than 10 tfachim tall. But if it's 10 tfachim tall, well then it would be its own rishus, right? Because of course a rishus hayachid is 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim at a height of, right, with walls that are 10 tfachim. And even if it's on like a plank that is 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim at a height of 10 tfachim, well then that would be considered a separate rishus hayachid, a separate rishus, and that would not be considered part of the chatzar. So even if it was less than 4 amis by 4 amis, but if it was 10 tfachim tall, so as long as it's 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim, if I'm not mistaken, so then it would be its own rishus, and it would not be considered part of the courtyard of the husband. Aval gavoa asara, if it's 10 tefachim tall, afagav zulavi arba amas, then it's no good. V'la amaron ela delays le shem livuy, and that's only, I guess, if you don't have a name for that plank. I guess if it's important enough that it has its own name for what this plank is, I guess. Aval is le shem livuy, if it has its own name, afagav zulo gavoa asara v'afagav zulavi arba amos, even if it is less than 10 tefachim tall, and it's less than 4 amos by 4 amos. But if it has its own special name, so then that makes it significant, and she would not be divorced because he didn't lend her that significant, that separate place. It's its own thing. He didn't lend that to her. All right, fine. All right, friends, that was the fine zayin Masechta Gittin. So yeah, we learned about the fellow who throws a get to his wife. We said if it's in his property, then she's not divorced. If it's in her property, then she is divorced. Brought up some sugyas reminiscent of Masechta Shabbos, Masechta Eruvin. We talked about Mashe Kona Isa, Kona Baila, so how even if it's in her Chatzer, how can it belong to him? Doesn't he own it? So he came up with different ukimtas. Maybe he said he doesn't have access to the Paris. Maybe Gita v'Chatzer boin ke'echad. All sorts of interesting sugyas. Friends, that was Daf Ein Zayin of Masechet Gittin. I hope you enjoy. Peace out.